Ms. Sukla, do you have a?
Yeah, I'd like to remove the audit one and the Longfellow rescue, just the audit one, sorry. I just had a question.
Okay.
So the recommendation is we're going with a different audit firm then? Is that the?
That's correct. Ms. Brang can elaborate.
I'm happy to see that.
Yes.
You know, having worked in finance a number of years, about 20-ish years ago, there was a big scandal with some big corporations. And so one of the big things that they recommend is that every so often a different firm look at your books. And so I think this is good news besides the prices, very reasonable. I think it's good news for us to have different eyes look at our financials. And I just wanted to say, I appreciate the work to have achieved this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thankful to.
Okay, so we'll do a roll call vote on this one too.
Ms. Birkenau?
Aye.
Dr. Garcia?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Dr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Dr. Sprague?
Aye.
Ms. Sukla?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye. All right, so move into the board consent agenda.
Make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Ms. Sukla, we can approve them with a roll call vote on this one unless there are items that board members want to discuss. Hearing
Ms.
none, we'll do the roll call vote.
Ms. Birkenau?
Aye.
Dr. Garcia?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Dr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Dr. Sprague?
Aye.
Ms. Sukla?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye. All right. Do we want to spend 26 minutes, then pause and listen to our showcase on the next item, or do we want to move to maybe a quicker info item?
I think we should start with the quicker items.
Okay.
That's just my.
Okay, just checking, making sure. So probably the achievement gap reduction report would be the next thing that we talk about. Cool.
Are they just planning to come after kids leave or something?
Yeah, there was some busing, transportation stuff going
Okay.
on.
I'll provide a little context for the Achievement Gap Reduction Report, and I might step on Carrie's toes a little bit, but this report is required by the Achievement Gap Reduction Law in State Statute 118.44. For some context, this law is the extension of a program previously called SAGE, or the Student Achievement Gap Guarantee in Education. So if you've heard SAGE or AGR, they're sometimes used interchangeably. And it provides funding to eligible school districts to put in place certain strategies to close the achievement gap. Under SAGE, the only strategy allowed was a student-to-teacher ratio of 1:18 in grades kindergarten through 3. Now additional strategies are allowed, including one-to-one tutoring and instructional coaching by certified teachers. For the 23-24 school year, the school district of La Crosse received about $2.3 million in funds to implement the AGR program. State law requires reports to be submitted to the school board at the end of each semester, so you see one now and another one in June or July. And this information can be thought of as a state-mandated monitoring report of our academic achievement. And no actions required, just that we present it to the school board, and we'll have our subject matter expert, Ms. Carrie Huth, deliver the information.
And he did cover some of my information, so it's greatly appreciated, but I apologize if I repeat it. As to how we look at supporting 3 strategies that we support our students, either small class size, 18-to-1, instructional coaching, or one-to-one tutoring. We have, as a district, decided to support the instructional coaching. We also, as a district, have decided to use the same data tools and measures at each elementary school to report out to you as well as the DPI. For kindergarten, we use number recognition as well as letter sound locally. Local assessment is an assessment that we have used for many years, but created here in our district. is reflective of a PALS testing that we used to do state mandate many years ago, but it's very similar to that. And then for our first, second, and third grade, so we use our iReady data for both math and reading. So as we get into the first table, we are looking at the AGR letter sound assessment for kindergarten. I do want to note that our local assessments, we are reporting on a benchmark for that time of the year. So you will notice as we work through kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, that our kindergarten numbers are a higher percentage because we have identified benchmarks for that time of the year. So currently, winter 2024, we have 74% of our students at the kindergarten level that are on track for our letter sounds. And then you can see it broken down by the reference group. If you go to the next table, we can look at historical data looking at fall 2022 into fall 2023, and you can make some comparables to our winter 2023 as well as winter 2024. Again, it's a different cohort of students, but you can see that it stays pretty steady with our numbers being 76% of our students are on track for that letter sound assessment this year, which is maintaining very similar to last year's numbers where it was 78%. And again, the fall numbers were very similar as well. And again, down below, you can see our reference groups broken down in the data. There's some things to celebrate and some things that we're digging a little deeper in. And it is pretty comparable to our other data that we are looking at when we're looking at equity within our district. Some things to highlight, and I think of our kindergarten, first and second and third are implementing OG, which is a newer curriculum within the last few years, but it also focuses zero or less than 10 for that reference group. Continuing to look at the tables in comparison from last year to this year. This year in math, kindergarten through fifth grade are all in their first year of implementation of a new math curriculum. Historical data showed that we needed to really reflect on our math curriculum and make some changes. So we are in the first year of rolling out Envision at the K through fifth grade level. We had some grade levels last year, or some teachers piloting that program. And so it's new to most students and most teachers, but some students and teachers had the chance to learn a little bit more about that program last year as well, or that resource, apologize. So this year, we started the year with kindergarten being 81% on track. Oops, I apologize, go back to fall. 91% on track. And this winter, right now, we're at 85% on track. So we're watching those numbers as well. Any questions about kindergarten? That's reported a little differently than the next three grade levels. Okay. iReady is a computer-based testing that we use 3 times a year in first through fifth grade and even into the middle school grade levels. But looking at our AGR report, we're reporting out on first, second, and third grade. We're going to start with reading. So with iReady data, we are measuring towards an end of the year benchmark. So you will notice that over the course of the year, that percentage will hopefully rise, right, and work towards the end of the year benchmark. So you will notice that for winter, you can look and see that at first grade, we are 37.8% on track for reading. second grade 44.6, third grade 52.3, and the number of students that were proficient there, and the subgroups. And again, that NA means that that student count is under 10. We look at the next table, again, still reading, but you can compare from the fall 2023 to winter 2024, and you can see growth in all areas and all reference groups for reading. If there are dashes, that indicates that there was no students that 0% were proficient at that time, as you can note in grade 1. But again, to celebrate some huge successes, looking more specifically at, again, our English language learners doing a wonderful job, jumping from 3.8% proficient in the fall to 29.6% proficient currently, as well as students with disabilities, our Asian reference group. And then looking from last year to this year, if we're looking at fall of 2022 to fall of 23, you can see that we again maintained very similar percentages, but a little higher in each one of them. And then again in the winter last year for first grade, we were 36% on track for readiness for reading. Right now we're 37.8. Second grade, we went from 41% to 44.6. And third grade, 45% to 52.3. Notice that obviously it's a different cohort, but hoping that that indicates some initial changes even within our curriculum with OG and the comprehension work we're doing there. Moving on to iReady Math for grades 1, 2, and 3. Again, this benchmark grows from, we are working towards the end of the year benchmark. So you can see where they are, our students are at winter of 2024 and where they fall within our reference groups. And if you look at the next table, you can again look at the comparisons between fall and winter and see growth across many of our areas, if not almost all of our areas. We've spent a lot of time with math and math curriculum this year, and we are seeing some of those results in our data. The students and staff are working very hard and in all grades, especially the kindergarten through third grade with the math and reading curriculum changes within the last few years. So we're continuing to focus on that quality instruction, using quality resources, while still facing some of the various barriers that we have faced for several years with the pandemic, but then also facing barriers with attendance as well as mental health. So a lot to celebrate and a lot of success that's happening within our schools. Any questions? Deb?
So at the beginning of the report, and this might be more of an administration question, so SAGE used to be really to provide more teaching staff so that you could have smaller class sizes. Now this talks about having instructional coaches called student success coaches. How many do we have, and does the funding that's provided fund all of them? Because we used to use the funding to pay for the greater number of teachers, so I just want to know a little bit more about the funding and the staffing.
Yeah, so we have 2 success coaches at each elementary school, so that helps with that coaching aspect. In addition, our goal is still 18 to 1, you know, as far as the student to staff ratios, and certainly averaged across the district, we are well below that. I think there's a handful of classrooms that are larger than 18 to 1. Nearly all of them are less than 18 to 1 in order to continue to maintain class size as a strategy, as well as that coaching opportunity to really maximize.
When did we start with the student coaches, or the success coaches, I'm sorry?
We are in our third year of success coaches at the elementary level.
And that's kind of a more broad, recent strategy with the implementation of ESSER funding. I think we use the coaching strategy through reading specialists and other strategies since we went from AGR to SAGE. I think that's been our defined strategy since then. And I can't remember the specific date that changed. But.
So the coaches were funded by ESSER, and now they're funded by this program.
Yes. Just making sure. I want to make sure I'm not saying anything wrong.
Other questions about the data or the AGR report?
Not seeing any.
I guess the only question I have, you've mentioned we've changed curriculums a couple times in the past few years for both math and reading. I know we've heard it in some of our linkages on some of the curriculum changes. How often does that happen? How impactful is it to teachers as far as retraining and, you know?
Yeah, going back from math, I know that Math Expressions was the previous resource that was used, and that was likely, not knowing and being in the district at that time, likely that was about 2013 in which that was initially implemented, so we're looking at about 10 years of using that resource, and it was not meeting the standards at this point that to best meet our students' needs. It's good to reflect on curriculum every year, but we often look at a curriculum cycle that's looking at resources probably around once every 7 years. And sometimes that's driven by state standards as well as just best practice and what we know.
Okay.
And I would say that the curriculum cycle and our professional development has been very supportive of the new curricular changes for both OG and Envision Math. Our professional development for our elementary teachers has really been focused on continual training development. We've had the math trainers here several times this year, in person as well as virtually, to support the implementation for our teachers. And as we plan into next year, and the vision is to continue that support so we can make sure that we're using that resource to the best of its ability and supporting our students in their learning. So also making sure that we support those resources for our teachers with using the resources.
And then the process we use for selecting curriculum heavily involves teachers.
Yes.
They pilot a couple of curriculum and weigh in on what they think will be best for our students in our district. And that feedback is really instrumental in understanding which direction to proceed once we're thinking about a curricular change.
I know last year for math, there were, out of the pilot group, 91% of that pilot group chose Envision, so it was very highly supported by our elementary staff.
I had a couple of questions. One is like, are the fall scores that are like under 10% for math and under 30 for reading, are they meant to be low because they're like pre and post test data? It's sort of like you wouldn't expect a first grader to perform at a high level in the first few weeks of school. They're
Correct, and they're also it's measured towards the end of the year expectation. And also for
that's
many.
what I was
Yes.
getting at, that it's
And
giving, it's.
It's the growth over that year, as well as taking a test on a computer for a brand new first grader is a new experience. So there's also some learning involved with that, but it's normed across the United States and with the people that use and the districts that use the testing.
Is there
tool.
pushback about taking the tests on computer?
I think because they know that we are teachers, and speaking for myself in talking with my staff at Spence previously, like we know that we receive dollars to support our 18-to-1 and our coaches. And then we also use the data to reflect on our curricular resources or reflect on our instruction to know what needs to change so we can best support our students. So too much, there's a fine line between too much and what's needed for just solid instruction.
Well, I would say that this local data is more valuable to us than the state standardized testing, which comes 7 to 8 months after you've taken the test. This is in the school year. As soon as the kids have taken the test, you can see the results and you can immediately adjust your instruction and develop individualized plans as a result. And so generally this is far more valuable to our staff.
To add on to that, often those grade level teams through their professional learning communities are looking at the data. They're looking at what students might need a double dip, another opportunity to learn that information. So it is, staff are very responsive to the data at the time.
I have a question. When we invest in a new curriculum, I imagine that though, you mentioned the math trainers, I imagine there's a number of visits or a number of hours that is like a part of our purchase of that material. Have we had to go beyond that with any like add-on hours or anything?
Not that I'm aware, being new to the role, right? So not that I'm aware that we've gone above and beyond this year. I think we very strategically planned for those hours last year, and we are already planning, we're in the budget cycle right now, so looking at what that means for next year and planning appropriately.
The assessment through this program, is it only available virtually?
So the iReady is online. That is the only choice for iReady. The local assessments are done one-on-one, teachers and students.
So the kindergarten ones, right?
Yes, yes, local assessments that are the kindergarten assessments. Grades 1, 2, and 3 are iReady online.
Okay. I'm just curious because that was one of my questions a while ago when we're looking at cost-saving levers we can pull is how much is it costing us to fund iPads for K through third grader, which is new as of the pandemic. We didn't used to have those, and how important is it that we have those now? But it sounds like because of the assessments we do, it's pretty critical.
And I would say that even with Act 20, in the state statute of with Act 20, we will, they will designate a benchmark assessment like iReady, but they will choose. So the whole state will be using the same benchmark assessment when we implement Act 20 in the fall of '24.
And one of the neat things about the math curriculum that we've chosen is that it has a lot of online resources as well. And so kids can do worksheets on there, math games, and various things that allow teachers to set up groups, that are scaled based on individual level. They're able to circulate, differentiate, for kids rapidly. And so there's opportunities using that technology on a regular basis in classrooms. There are some settings where it does not make sense to use an iPad. You want kids running and throwing and doing those sorts of things, and it's best if it's not the iPad they're throwing. And so it's all situational dependent and the right balance and use of that technology.
Do we also have reasonable accommodations for students who would have difficulty testing through? I imagine that's already part of the plan.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, we look at small groups, we look at, just depending on if they have a individual educational plan. A lot of times at those younger grades, a teacher will use the small groups to have students testing. And so it is monitored, so they're not just clicking buttons. So we want authentic scores as well, so, yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I will be back again in June with an AGR report.
Great. Let's see, we've got 5 minutes. Do we want to start on the budget timeline, perhaps? Okay.
I think our guests arrived. though.
Is everybody here from the Good Fight? Yes, okay. Do you want to come up now and do the spotlight like 5 minutes early?
Sure. Where do you want us at?
So we have a little podium right up here if you just want to come up and, so to all who are listening, the spotlight tonight is the Good Fight Community Center. We have the interim executive director, Amanda Werman-Homgard. Homegard, thank you. And Eugene Shields, yep, youth behavior specialist. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, Katie.
What's this
Yeah, so. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
So from what I understand, just wanted us to share a little bit about the programs that we offer, specifically the in-school programs, correct? Yeah, which would be, first of all, our Good Fight Way program, which is in-school academic accountability and support program for children in middle school, both of the public middle schools. And Eugene is our primary person for that. I'll just hand the microphone over to him for a minute, because he is our main point person for that. He's the one that is in the schools every day and working with the kids.
Yeah, how are you guys doing? So, yes, I'm in the schools Monday through Thursday. I go to Longfellow and I go to Logan Middle School and I assist them in whatever they need me to do, actually, for real. So it's like, I'm there. I mean, whatever they need me to do, I'm in the schools. Y'all got me on the spot, yeah, I'm kind of nervous. Any
So-
questions, anything you want to ask me?
I would just offer up that I've been in the schools and seen Eugene in the office, working with kids, making unique connections that they wouldn't necessarily have elsewhere, and having somebody help focused on doing the right thing in school and showing up to class. You know, in the limited interactions I've had, it's been a positive difference in kids' lives, and so I'm thankful for the Good Fight and the things that they're doing for our kids to create unique connections that we wouldn't otherwise be able to make.
Yeah, it's all based on mentorships, right? Relationships. And Eugene is really good at that, building relationships with the kids to, as Dr. Engel said, help them make the right choices to make sure they're getting to class on time, make sure they're staying in class, making sure they're not being disruptive, making sure they're not hanging out in bathrooms or hallways, but also checking in with them, making sure they're staying on top of grades and assignments. And then when they come to the Good Fight, if they do come to the Good Fight after school, we have tutors there every day that can sit down with them and work with them on specific things that they might be struggling with, help them catch up on assignments. And every kid that's part of the Good Fight Way program also gets a free membership to the general Good Fight program. Does anybody have any questions that you want to know specifically about how the program works, or?
I am curious, just so the accountability program, and you mentioned you're kind of there for whatever needs. I'm just interested in how does accountability show up for you in the interactions with the students, or in particular, without giving too many details about specifics. So.
Actually, I have about 15 children that are on my caseload, but I don't just limit it to the children that are on my caseload. So every day it varies. I just handle any situation that is out of their control or and like right up under the police officer, that they come to me. So like I said, I make sure I have a great relationship with a lot of the children there, so it's kind of easy for me to speak to them or get them on the right track. So.
And I know a big part for you is mutual respect that you have with the students as well.
Right through the beginning, like in the beginning, like I don't tolerate the bros or the, so it's like I'm gonna treat them like little men and women, and they treat me like an adult, and we have mutual respect, man. And for me, it's taken me a long way because a lot of people don't have those relationships with those children in the schools. So when I come in, it's like, yeah, children start to act a little better.
Yeah, and because of that relationship with you and that respect that they have for you, they want to please you because you also do a really good job of following up with them and praising them when they do make the right decision and when they are having a good day.
Yeah, definitely. I keep in contact with the parents, even when they're having, like, a lot of the situations I've seen is they only get the calls when the children are doing bad. So I tend to call them when they're doing good and give them their praises as well. And I have lunches with them periodically, like maybe once or twice every 2 weeks, So, and like I said, I have 10 kids on my caseload, but I deal with like 100 and something children on a daily basis. So, yeah. But I love what I do, so it's a pleasure.
How is your work different than system of care and what Bridget Todd Robbins is doing?
I don't know exactly what I know they get the children that like have like on borderline, like have cases or like that. I don't know. So I guess I catch them right before that happens.
Yeah, so we're the early intervention program before that. The goal is that administrators and teachers identify students that might be starting down a path that would lead to, more truancy, more problems down the line. And then we hopefully get those kids before that point. If they do get beyond what is within our capacity according to our contract to handle, then those kids usually get referred to systems of care or some other program that would be better suited for them at that point.
How is your contract
It isn't.
It's not currently funded.
No,
We're providing it, gratis.
not right now, not yet.
What kind of, how do kids get transported and how is that? I mean, it sounds like they're going from the middle, after school, they can go down.
Yeah, so I pick up children from Logan and Northside Elementary every day after school, and one of my coworkers pick up children at Longfellow. So we transport them and then we take them home afterwards. So. Yeah.
So you said you're mostly in the middle schools.
Yes.
Do you keep in touch once they start going into the high schools to like see how they're doing there? Or is there like another resource that you kind of refer them to, or other people that you point people, or?
No, every child that's been on my caseload, once they got to high school, they still come back to me at the Good Fight. So it's like I keep in tune with them,
Yeah.
even after they get out of middle school.
As long as we have that relationship with them, we do the best we can on our end to maintain it. Some of the kids at that point, you know, if they're older and moving on to high school, some of them decide, you know, that it's not where they want to be anymore. They want to try something else. A lot of them especially get into sports or other extracurricular activities in high school. So it really all depends, but as much as we can, we keep in contact with those kids and maintain that relationship with them.
Yes.
That's great.
How many kids are you seeing at the Good Fight after school every day?
30 to 35 every day.
Easy. Yeah.
Where's your facility?
It's located on 6th Street. It's right in between the Cathedral of St. Joseph the Workman and the post office. Yeah. Any other questions?
Please.
Yeah.
You're very welcome.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank you for appreciating the work. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And in addition to the Good Fight Way program, we do have a class that we teach called Becoming in all of the public middle schools as well, which is a middle school to high school transition class. And that is to help kids, make that transition in a informed way and a healthy and safe way. So for example, we have, it's a discussion formatted class where we talk about things like the importance of having a trusted adult that you can come to, at least one. Where can you find resources in high school similar to what you had in middle school? We help them identify who their school counselors are going to be if they're going to one of the 2 public high schools in La Crosse. We talk about the importance of having a plan to set yourself up for success. We talk about why attendance is important, all those sorts of things.
Is that class homegrown, or is there a framework that you're adopting from some other organization?
It's homegrown, yep. It's a proprietary program that was written by our founder, Nate Coleman.
Great.
Mhm.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
For all that you do for our students.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. So let's move on in our information items. We'll move on to the discuss school consolidation referendum and additional referendum options item. Dr. Engel, do you want to begin discussion on this one?
Certainly. So in response to an RFI from the last meeting, I think from Mr. Korberg, about kind of a menu of options and potential mill rate impacts to help kind of understand what a referendum would cost and, scope. We worked with Bray Architects to identify kind of an updated list of things that's included in this packet of information on the second and third pages. And I highlighted some projects that we feel from administration's point of view as being relevant, based both on the school board's discussion as well as the long-range facility plan. In addition, mill rate impacts are important as we think about referenda, and so we worked with our financial advisor, PMA, to get estimates on mill rate impacts, and then put together a couple of just imagined options. They're not any sort of recommendation, just ways to think about things and what different combinations could yield in terms of total cost and mill rate impact. As you go through the packet, there's a proposed floor plan for a tech ed addition, and these are very preliminary, just kind of square foot estimates. You know, it doesn't imagine second floors or some other things that could change how that looks for both Central and Logan. And then three different potential state road options that we discussed from time to time that include the addition of an LMC or a gym or just classrooms. And so these are just things to help the board explore your interests and help put together the scope of a referendum in November to meet the board's intent from the last meeting. And so happy to answer any questions and with regard to any of this as you discuss.
Can we talk about State Road for a sec? So I'm wondering where the 8 classroom figure kind of came from as being the option here. If some cohort of students is to join State Road, given that they're already under capacity, why are we getting to eight new classrooms in each of the options?
So 8 classrooms comes in part from a pre-existing floor plan that Bray had worked with us on, probably, was it 2018
Just
maybe?
for an addition?
An addition.
Okay.
It's something that had been identified in long-range plans at State Road for many years, particularly the gymnasium addition. It does not have it shares a cafeteria and gymnasium, which makes scheduling very challenging. And so an addition of a gymnasium there has been on the long-range facility plan for quite a while. The 8 classrooms, that as a number is intended to try and facilitate kind of a merging of potential elementary schools.
Do you know offhand what 8 classrooms would bring the capacity of the school overall to?
It'd be about 160 for the 8 classrooms on average, plus the 380 or whatever it's at right now, so we're talking 540-ish.
Brings it
somewhere.
in line with our idea of best practices in
Yes.
an elementary school. Okay.
Mhm.
Would that keep classrooms 18 or less? Because I think State Road has some that are at 26 this year,
Not at K3.
4th grade.
It's a possibility, yeah. The goal at the upper elementary is 25 or less. 26 is a little further than we'd like, but then you get into like weird splitting situations. State Road is a little tighter than some of our other buildings in terms of classroom space, and so finding additional classrooms is a challenge from time to time. The goal with all of these conversations is to continue to maintain 18-1 at lower elementary and 25-1 at the upper elementary.
I guess, maybe I'm the only one. I feel a little, first of all, administration did what we asked them to do, so any comments are not on any of the work that's been presented. I feel a little bit like maybe we're putting the cart ahead of the horse, because we haven't decided, as we used the term at the last meeting, which would be if we don't have this referendum, what would close? And I think until we decide that, then how many classrooms would you need in any building? Because we don't know. Would we have to close another school and merge 2 schools together? I think that maybe that's something we should talk about first before we start figuring out which one of these we want. At some point, we're going to need all this data, so I appreciate that work that's been done. The other thing that I feel like we had a good conversation at our last meeting about having a public input opportunities and maybe in April and May. And I think, again, I'm struggling with making a lot of decisions till we get more of that public input, because the public is very eager to provide input. I can't go anywhere, and I think probably I speak for most of us, when we go out in the community and people are already asking questions and people want to know, and have you thought about this, and have you thought about this, and what about that? And I think those public input sessions would be a good opportunity to kind of address that before we get too far down the road. to figure out which school would be the next lever, to figure out which school we should add classrooms on. So that's just how I'm thinking, and maybe I'm slowing this down too much. So that, I've
Sure.
got some other
Yeah,
questions, but I think at the
so.
outset, that's just where my head is at.
Yeah, I think we have, kind of, again, we're at two paths, right? Like, we picked our first step. We're gonna go to referendum, see if the community can support an Emerson-Spence consolidation at the Hogan site. So like, the two paths are, do we identify a second school before we have the referendum results? Some of the options that were presented to us included like, Hinchin closure that would bump students up to State Road, which you can see reflected here, which if that's what the board wanted to do, a November referendum to bundle it all together is one way to do it. If the board was like unsure about having too much in one referendum and not wanting to choose two like that off the bat, then that would kind of force us down the path of the referendum only including language for Emerson and Spence, unless we wanted to do some of these additional referendum options.
And that's exactly, there's other options is what we asked administration to put together for us. But as I kind of sit back and I look at all this, like, what do we need the 8 classrooms for? And if we merge another school into State Road, are 8 enough? And so that's kind of where I got to thinking about this. And I, personally, on the proposals that have been given to us, I would have a hard time including anything with high schools. I think the community is still pretty tender about the last referendum, and I wouldn't want that to impact the referendum for the elementary schools. So that's just my personal opinion on wrapping all those together. But again, I think that's just my opinion, and I would really prefer to hear some public input before I really come down and say, I vote for this or I vote for that.
Sure, what do other board, so I guess just from a scheduling standpoint, right, like, if we wanna have referendum language, we just need to know what's in the referendum, what would the cost to our community be for whatever projects we're proposing. So from you all, I just need to know, or us all, we just need to decide, I guess, like, a timeline for determining that referendum language. Do we want to, does the majority of the board want to include these 8 classrooms at State Road, which would lock us into closing Hinchin if the referendum passed? Or these additional things, or does the board want to do one closure and then afterwards the second closure? So just in terms of scheduling, I just need to know what people want. And we can like make it a formal vote, but I think it's a great time to have a little discussion since we kind of got over the first hurdle of picking the first step. I just need to know kind of where people are. Like, do we continue the discussion? Do we continue at every single meeting until a vote happens? Do we delay? Do we have community engagement and then talk about it again? This is information we requested, and now is a good time to talk about what do we want to do with this?
Okay, so we're going to referendum in November.
Yep.
When would be the next time we could put forth a capital referendum after that?
You can put 2 issues in a year, and since we won't be going to referendum in April, you could potentially put 2 items on the November ballot. So that's a way to think about it in terms of you could ask 2 questions. Do you want to do this thing, and do you want to do this thing? After that, it would be April.
So we could see if November passes and then go to referendum again in April?
It's a possibility, and then there's the there's primaries and generals that you can go to a referendum for. So there's about 4 opportunities in most years, except for when there's not a general partisan election. So like every other November, you don't have an opportunity.
Politics might be weird of like,
I know, it just feels weird to, this is the perpetual problem we're in. There's like overwhelming pros and cons to every path forward. And like, the problem with choosing the third lever now ahead of the referendum is if the referendum fails, that will likely change everything. And we likely will just do something closer to the FAC recommendation and pick 2 schools and close them outright. So like, why engage everybody's sensitivities about an option that would only happen if the referendum passes? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I see your point, but I just thinking about like the benefits of doing 2 versus 1 question. I
Yeah.
feel like there is benefit to having as complete a solution, like a plan laid out as possible without the need, but I get what you're saying. I think that's a
Well,
legitimate
and what if like,
concern.
what if we put it forth as 2 questions
Right.
and one passes and the other, like, what if
Right.
the Spence
Yeah.
Hogan one doesn't pass and the state road engine one does pass, then what are we gonna do?
Then the sequencing is really the most important. Am I the most microphoned person?
I don't know.
Yeah, then the sequencing is really important, because what we wouldn't want is, in our own work, to have put questions forward where the second one is contingent upon the first one happening a certain way, right?
Yeah.
And then to have them both out there where it can't necessarily happen in that way would be a problem.
Yeah, and I do think transparency is important, and the community knowing like, well, what if it fails, then what? At this point, it's weird for me and Brad and Jeff to be part of that, because we won't be voting board members on that decision. Whoever gets elected, if that referendum fails, is part of the group who will vote on that. So even if we could get to a majority of people here who would be like, we'll do these things if it fails, the people who have to vote on a closure will be different, and the
Right.
vote could be different, which might mislead the public to thinking a different outcome is
Yeah.
possible. So like, it's just messy.
In a referendum question, can we say do you support the building of the new school and other construction, which we haven't decided on? We can put all that in one, right?
Yep, you could say.
So it's all or nothing. I'm just asking that question because I think if we get 2 questions, I mean, it's gonna be a heavy enough lift to get the right information out about why a referendum, why this board is supporting referendum, why we think the community would want to support a referendum on one issue, much less 2. That's why I'm trying to figure
Yeah.
out.
I worry that having 2 will strike some people as an option, as if it's
Right.
one or the other,
Yeah.
even though it won't be that. But I'm just worried that on the
I
ballot,
agree.
it would look like that.
Yep, you could put 2 disconnected issues on there, so, the CTE edition being one of those. You could say, referendum to consolidate, Emerson and Spence at the Hogan site, and to put career and technical education additions onto Logan and Central High Schools, for X number of dollars. You could offer up all of that as a menu for people to consider. If you look at the history of referendum, they include lots of things, HVAC updates, plus security things, plus remodeling, plus, grounds maintenance, plus a football field. So it can be as much of a potpourri as you want it to be. I think as we had discussed at some past meeting, Ms. Sukla explained how, some of the prior referendum may have caused confusion because of how complicated they were, and maybe led to some discontent as a result. And so there's simplicity isn't the worst thing in the world. That said, you can pair things that bring together multiple constituencies to make something successful as well.
Sorry, I have like a lot of random scattered questions.
Good questions. Good questions.
How have the plans at the Boys and Girls Club to basically double their capital build for vocational programming impacted our assessment of what's needed for CTE additions at Logan and Central?
Yeah, and they will be presenting to the board in the near future on that plan, so I don't want to speak too heavily for them. Our career technical education supervisor, Britta Rodering, has been a part of the development of that work and scope. It's relatively limited space that's intended to be flexible, and while specific to certain career areas, it's also pretty small in scale. For the automotive pathway, as an example, there will be an overhead door, so you could bring a vehicle in and maybe put it up on like a ramp lift, but certainly nothing to the extent we would want in a true high school automotive facility that would have full lifts so that you can get underneath vehicles safely, you know.
So their plans have been factored into what our assessment is for our needs? Okay.
Absolutely. It would provide additional on-course stuff, you know, maybe some light after-school opportunities, certainly some summer opportunities, maybe extending the school day in some ways. But the scope of their facilities do not meet the needs of a school district of our size. And if we're looking at neighbors and thinking about, you know, the diesel mechanic program that's over at West Salem, like we have nothing remotely close to, you know, something like what they have. If we look at Onalaska, you know, what they're able to offer for robotics and advanced manufacturing, we have no space that allows us to compete with our neighbors in that regard. If you look at Holman's new addition and what they've done for career and technical education, you know, we're not in the ballpark of what our neighbors are able to offer in these critical fields.
Have we looked at, I mean, so two things. One, I think my opinion is we should keep this much as in context of our big question, which is we're talking about consolidating two elementary schools onto a site, but we have to look at the cascading effect of what that could impact. So if we reboundary, we will have an impact at Hamilton with new students. Or do they have enough space? Do they have enough support staff? Will that impact Soda 1? You know, that's where the context I'm looking at. And also, like, if we're going to build on Hogan, what are we going to do with Hogan? We have to go tell that story to the community that says, we've talked about this, here's the cascading effects that we see and the areas that we're going to see effects around. That, I think, we have to be pretty concise about. I think I would like to make sure that we're all getting to that agreement. Because I think there could be some, but I think if we look at like a state road on there, it's just going to muddy the waters, like we've predetermined the path of the future. We may or may not have, right? But if we start putting those types of questions on there or including them in there, they're going to see, conspiracy theorists are going to understand or see that there's something in there, even though there might not be. But two, as we start talking about like CTE, and I looked at also like auditoriums and sports facilities, we have lots of redundancy in a lot of these like ideas and budgetary requests. I know the district I came from, we were very heavily into the CTE investment, and we had one centralized building that we sent everybody to. They made blocks on the way if somebody was in that career path or wanted to explore those options. They built the blocks around that to get them into those facilities, to build transportation and time away from there. But I'm struggling to understand, I'm struggling if we don't have to, given our limited footprints at both Logan and Central, like we should try to explore centralized facilities to try and make us become one district, rather than Central has this, Logan has this, theirs is better, mine's not as cool. Like, I want to make sure that we want to explore all those options. Again, I'll probably be gone by that point, but I would like to at least.
Popular in the consolidation.
That is why we have scoped out things both north and south, because we heard clearly in 2022 that one high school was not of interest and that investing in both was a priority for our community. And so when we ask for scope on CTE, we look at both schools.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, that's the direction I've received, so.
I feel like the community might be a little more agnostic to that. Like if you said, I want one sports facility, that might be pretty not well received. But I think if things like fine arts and CTE, I think that's less, if the location's the right location and it makes sense and we've got a really top-notch space, it might be a little less north-south fight than you would maybe believe. But maybe I'm misreading the room as well. I just see it as just multiple go asks to the community when you can make one decent ask that may be in the middle.
I would largely agree, Jeff, with what you're saying about the community being agnostic on a centralized facility for specific programs like CTE. I don't think that runs us afoul of the community's sentiments about the high schools as the primary educational sites, and that we can make investments in both of the high schools that are you know, in the other classrooms, in the other facilities, and look at options for this. My hang up, and to go back to what you were first saying about staying focused on the big question, I think I'm even going a little further back to the original question of, well, we have this structural deficit, and the referendum that we've decided on already gets us part of the way there. So Deb, to your point a little bit, we kind of need to resolve, are we getting all of the way there in one shot, or are we looking at getting all the way there in two? What are the options that we have there? And so I do feel like, so when I see, I know that you know, we wanted to shop out these options for the CTE additions. We want to have this data in front of us, and a lot of these plans have been on our lists for quite a long time, right? But right now, it feels like the question is still, what are we doing about the primary facility sites in order to allow us to address our demographic changes and the imbalance in the size of our district and our level of staffing that has resulted from those changes. That's where I'm at, if that answered the earlier question, Annie, sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree generally. I think simplicity is best. Like, just reflecting on all the people I've talked to about this, there's questions about, like, you know, you have to imagine the question before a person in the little booth, and they have maybe just heard people talk about it. Like, it needs to be really crystal clear what the problem is, right? Like, what the original issue is, and then what the result of their vote will be. And I think the problem we've made super clear to everybody is that deficit issue that we're facing, right? And that we're looking at elementary school consolidations. If our referendum includes language that answers that halfway, all the way, whatever, then I think it will be more successful. I don't know. I would love to spend a ton of money and make this district amazing with all these new additions and stuff too. So like, part of me is like, but could it pass? Could we do it anyway? But I think like, being focused on the problem and just knowing that, like, you'll have to sell it to the community, like, that the issue was this, that this solves it this much all the way, part of the way, and this will be a benefit to our students because X, Y, Z. The CTE stuff I really like, but it's like a whole different group of students, separate. I think it'll be harder for people to imagine, like, what's happening and where, you know,
Right.
where will those be and that sort of thing.
I agree, and so as much as I would like to do that as well, that feels like the next question after the next question to me. And if we're able to resolve this first pressing issue, part of what we're able to say is, like, this is what's enabling us to make those greater investments in the opportunities that we want to be able to put out, to update our facilities, to bring us in line with our neighboring districts, and even to compete favorably with them. And I think that is really important in at least in part, to the extent that we can, you know, drawing people here, keeping them here, and hopefully putting a more positive trend on those demographic numbers. So I think the first question needs to come first, in other words.
What kind of options do we have with our community partners like TC and some of their facilities? I know we use some of their facilities already, so.
Yeah, we already have a partnership for our engineering academy with Western Technical College, our culinary academy with Western. We have our construction academy is off-site. You know, we'll talk a little bit more about that later tonight. The challenge that we have is that students are exploring pathways as freshmen and sophomores. And these academy opportunities are at the higher level for juniors and seniors. At the lower levels, students often don't want to leave the comfort of their environment to go explore something at a strange place that they're unfamiliar with and uncomfortable with. The way they're designing career and technical education labs today, whether it's engineering, advanced manufacturing, you know, the traditional like woods and welding, it's with big windows that allow you to walk by it every day and see it. When we toured the Sun Prairie High School that was built recently, it was phenomenal. The CTE wing was right off the cafeteria and commons. So that every day you got to see the health science lab, the CNA lab, you got to see the culinary lab through big windows and imagine yourself doing those sorts of things. And so our partnerships with our partners in the area have been phenomenal, but at the high end is where that makes sense. we need something to draw in kids every single day to help them imagine what those careers could be, to bring them in through an intro class in freshman and sophomore year so they can pursue that as a junior and senior. And for many of our kids, you know, those academies are great, but not their pathway. That's an intensive, singular focus, and if I change my mind as a senior, I still want to be able to take a welding class or a woods class or an automotive class. And so we'll continue to seek those partnerships, you know, with TC and UW and community businesses, but we need these opportunities in our schools too. And that is one of the challenges of a central facility also. It's just, you know, what comes with not having these opportunities available in those buildings. We partner a lot across our schools. Half of our extracurriculars are partnered, and most of our non-athletics at this point, it seems. You know, so there's certainly familiarity, and people don't mind the travel all the time. But when I think about a comprehensive high school education, it's about having access where kids are at. That makes a real difference in their interest in allowing kids to explore what they want. So.
There's recent data I've seen too, that, both at the higher education and the secondary level, that having a time commitment, having something that requires you to be someplace in an activity also leads to greater retention, greater persistence, and greater outcomes. So I think there's something to that for sure. I was just at Waukesha County Technical College at the end of this last week, and it's exactly that. All of these wonderful facilities, huge windows that they're in the main buildings, and it really just looks and feels inviting and great, like a machine shop feels inviting. You know, it's not tucked away down in a basement behind a sliding door or something.
And I would say that's the current challenge we face with our career and tech ed facilities. If you go to Central, I mean, it's tucked away in the back. You can't access it. It's hard to see. It's confined. Logan's a little bit better, but it's still dark and kind of a warren to kind of get around those things. You know, they were designed in the 60s and 70s, not for what we need today. And our CTE teachers have done an amazing job of making those spaces as inviting as possible. But, you know, we try and run an automotives class, and all we have is a single motorcycle that fits at Central. Like, that is not a pathway for students, even though we have a huge transportation pathway in our community. We're not able to properly support those careers for students. We need multiple overhead doors and lifts to be able to give kids those experiences hands-on at the young ages in order to pursue those opportunities right here in our community. Otherwise, we're ceding them to other school districts.
So I'm going to go back to, are we going to do the public input or not? I'd like to hear from the board if we're going to do that. The comment, the mill rate information that was provided, again, one of the concerns that I've heard about previous operating and capital referendums is you take a retiring referendum and then you add this one and you just report on the net, and perhaps that's part of a message to the public, but we as a board need to know the true cost and not just the net cost. And that information I'd like to see in future discussions. Looking at the information for costs with middle schools, it wouldn't take a lot more to build new ones. I'm just gonna say that because I really want to see new middle schools. I've been preaching that since the early 2000s and 20 years, and I'm just gonna keep preaching it. I am getting confused though on the CTE space. I don't disagree with what's being said, but I'm getting confused, and I think the public will get confused. On one hand, we have a deficit, we have a big deficit, and we've got to address this deficit, and we've got to close schools to address this deficit. On the other hand, we'd like to build all these really nice, cool things. And I feel like those are mixed messages, and I think we have to, again, as has been mentioned earlier, maybe we do this in stages. We have a deficit, we have to close schools, let's consolidate 2 schools into 1 building and have that discussion. It doesn't get us all the way, but that's a future discussion. But then, quite frankly, the need for CTE space, this is one of the first times I'm hearing about this at this board table, and so I think the public's gonna say, where the heck did that come from? So I think we wanna be consistent in our messaging. We've been, as our board president has said, we've been consistent, we have a deficit, and we have to make some tough choices to address that deficit. And I think that's where I would like to keep our message simple, clean, very crystal clear. And I think instead of having conversations about what do we do if the referendum doesn't pass, and we of course have to have those, but what can we do to make this a referendum that would be successful in this community, is where we should be spending our time. And I think to do that goes back to public input. And I think some public input sessions now would be very important. I think there's a lot of hunger and need and desire to communicate by the public. I know individuals come to our meetings, but we need to go to them for it to be meaningful input. And I know you had some really good recommendations at the last meeting of some ways that we can do dialogues, whether it's with the Chamber of Commerce over a Zoom for lunch, or there's all kinds of ways we can provide opportunities for meaningful input from the public. And I think if we allow that, because there's kind of the pressure is building up, but if we allow that opportunity, it kind of releases that pressure, and it can allow people to step back and listen to our messages to why this capital referendum is a good idea.
So we will have a workshop March 13th to talk about all that community engagement stuff. So I had gathered everybody's availability. March 13th looked like the date that most board members were available to talk. So what we'll do during that one is we'll talk about all the things that you just mentioned, like how the board wants to engage the public. So just from like board president, trying to schedule things, make sure stuff's happening on the agendas that we need to have happen. I guess I see us needing to come to a decision on, like, it seems like the CTE edition in this referendum is probably not wanted. I'm hearing more like concern about how it might muddy the message and could tank the success of the referendum. So I'm just needing to know, are we going with half of the solution, or are we going with a whole solution? Does the board want to go to the community with a referendum option that consolidates schools over here on the south side, Emerson and Spence, and then brings Hinchin students up to State Road, solving the majority of our deficit? I think there's still like 0.6 million that's not addressed. Or does the board want to do partway there, take the second step later? So just trying to, like, we're not making a vote tonight, just trying to get ideas of like, what do people want? What do people think would work in a referendum? And do we have to go, if we're doing just a one-step, the Emerson Spence at Hogan, can we come up with the referendum language, the monetary ask, right? And then go to our public with those engagement sessions? That's kind of, so it sounds like to me we're saying CTE is like a next phase after we've addressed the deficit. So I just want to know, like.
For me, definitely it is, and I agree with, I mean, I thought we decided last time that the seeking public input on the referendum question was what's at hand here, and so the question to me is exactly as you put it. Are we going with just the referendum as we've already decided, or are we going to add that second lever, and if so, which one? And my perspective, I think, in going to whatever methods of public comment and public input we aim at, going with the question as fully formed as possible is going to get us the clearest responses, it's going to get us the clearest input, so that before the question is posed in November, we have had time to revise it and take that input into account as needed.
Can you remind me how you calculate what your individual burden would be when the mill rate changes? Like, I can see that with Emerson and Spence at Hogan, it would be a 29-cent mill rate, like for $100,000 household.
$29.
Okay, so it's even at a zero.
Yep.
But that's a net, that's not the actual total. That's a net because there's a retiring referendum.
Correct.
Which is projected to equal.
The way people think about their taxes, in my experience, doing a number of referendums, is they think about, what are my taxes this year? What will my taxes be next year?
Yeah,
And they want to know if they're going to go up or if they're going to go down.
How much?
And it's that net that impacts whether they go up or they go down. Some people are a little more business-minded and think about things in terms of like the whole, but that's been rare in my experience, where folks want to know that it's 54 cents that the mill rate change will be. What they're mostly interested in, the average taxpayer, is, am I paying more next year or less? How much?
I think as long as we're clear with that message that we're, this is the overall impact, we're having something fall off and we're gonna have something come on, I think agree, most people just care what the actual increase is going to be, but I think we're going to have to be
Yeah.
pretty clear to continue to be transparent and gain trust throughout the whole processes.
I think that
Here's what's falling off,
Yeah.
here's the total net cost, here's the actual increase over
Because
the.
that clarifies what the ask is,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Here's how much
And
we're
it shows that we're
asking.
being responsible, we're watching capital debt fall off.
Right.
We're timing it so it would work out well, so it would be a marginal impact.
And I
still
think that's a
impact, right?
selling point. I think
Agreed.
by
Oh,
saying
sure.
that, that makes it a selling point. This is the time to support this.
Okay, I wanna
Yeah.
go back to what you said. You said as complete an ask as possible.
Right, so
Does
if we
that
have,
mean you're saying we're closing 2 schools with the full referendum identifying? Okay.
I think that's the question. We've decided on what the basic referendum question is. Consolidate Emerson and Spence at a new build on the Hogan site. We know where that gets us to our structural deficit, and we had several options in front of us for that second lever, as I've been calling it. And so I think the relevant questions are which lever feels the best in terms of impact on parents' logistics and students' lives? Does it get us to reasonable boundaries? Are boundaries as big of a concern when, you know, busing has always been a part of our plan and school choice and intra-district transfer and everything? Like, what are the trade-offs that we want to consider in deciding what that is, and then being able to go and say, this is what we have thought is the best complete path forward, getting us to that 0.6 million, which is, if I'm not mistaken, knowing all of that information gives you the surety to say we can responsibly do deficit spending to cover 0.6 million for the short term while we find out what the impact is actually gonna be.
But 3 million for the short term. It's like 2.5 million a year in the short term that we'd be covering.
Right.
So it's a lot.
Right,
Yeah.
until the projects are actually complete, and then the remaining 0.6 is what
Yes,
it's
we'll
talking
figure that out along the way. We'll have time to do so.
Okay, that was my understanding.
Yeah.
So, right, so that's, I mean, I think, Deb, to your point about getting the public input, we need to go to them with a question and say, does this sound like a good plan? Here's why we have decided as your representatives, we feel it's a good plan. What are we missing?
Yeah. And I think that's
So-
what they want, provide input on is,
Sure.
and I'm sure you've all heard the calls, have you thought about this, have you thought about this? I personally, I think, as Katie said earlier in the meeting, I think if the one referendum doesn't pass, our second lever looks altogether different. So including that, till we get a passed referendum on the first big question, it's hard for me to agree to that, because I think that
But, well, sorry, if I can pose a counterfactual, though, if we go with the complete question and the community says, no, just do the consolidation, that's valuable input as well. And we
How
haven't
would
put
we know they said that?
Yeah, we wouldn't.
the public input or the referendum?
the public input.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. And if the goal is to have the public significantly impact the shape of the question itself for the referendum, we can do that. But I think
So-
the best way to get the clearest input is to go with as full a question as possible.
I would just, again, like timelines, and like, we need to have, so what's 70 days before the November referendum?
Mid-August.
So you would have to do like a blitz of community engagement and like hope that it fully captures the entire community's voting beliefs and input to come with a full, complete plan that you think the full community, like, I guess,
Well, that's why I think having a fully formed question makes it that much easier to do that. Like, I think that's the work in front of us, and we have to commit to a time frame.
I had also heard the board talk at the last meeting that this board wanted to put the question on the ballot for November. And so your timeline for that is the second meeting in April at the latest, where this will be the last time this board is seated. And so in terms of community engagement, that gives you 30 days.
it basically wouldn't be a thing. So I guess then, if we want to go with a full, complete plan in a referendum, the board would be deciding to do a lot of engagement over the whole summer, come up with that referendum, and that would be the work that the next president and the next board would take on. I would just not schedule anything until that workshop happens, and then I'm off. Because it would be impossible to transition that. But honestly, like, if that's the will of the majority of the board, then that's the will of the board. I do worry a little bit about going with too much information, just that clarity of message, like, would you have people voting, like, let's pick on, like, I don't know, a school that won't be part of it, North Side, right? Like, let's pretend North Side was our second closure. It absolutely will not be. It will not close. I'm only choosing that one because I don't want to raise any alarms, but like, let's say that was, closing North Side and we're going to add on to Summit, Northwoods, whatever. I just feel like the more pieces you add to a referendum ask, the more possibilities you open up of people like voting against it for their own self-interest, which may not turn out to be exactly what they expected or assumed would happen if they voted it down. I don't know, and that's, like, I just.
And that could be true even with community input, right? Because people will come and we have had community input.
It's mostly about their own school. Juan, were you saying something?
Yeah, if you can hear me over the rainstorm I'm dealing with.
You're a little quiet, can you talk real loud?
He's dealing with the rainstorm.
I will talk as loud as I can. How about that?
Good, thanks.
All right, so here's where I'm at. I think that we are the people in the community who are the most immersed in this idea of what we should do next. I agree with Dr. Sprague that we should be providing the most complete picture of a solution that gets us to our goal that we have set for ourselves, that 3.6 million deficit goal. I think that the community input should be more on what does this building look like and what does it capture internally once we move forward, rather than what option are we going to choose. The community is not as immersed as we are. And so I also believe that we need the most time possible to engage and educate our community on whatever referendum is chosen. The more time we spend on trying to figure it out, the less time we have to educate, inform, and move forward on what the project should be.
Still
We lost you a bit, Juan.
I can hear him talking, but I can't hear him talking.
There you
Yes.
are, he's back.
Okay, so I don't know how much you caught, but I was going on for a minute or so.
We've got a lot.
We heard you say basically,
You want to complete?
yes, a complete plan determined by the board so that there's more time to engage the community with what the schools would look like inside.
Yeah, so I mean, we need time to educate, if whatever we choose, we need time to educate the public on why that's the right way to go forward. The public input should be on what do these buildings look like moving, as we construct them, getting input from families, getting input from our staff. That makes more sense to me than trying to put in public input now. Not to say I don't want public input now, I just think we have a very, very tight window. It doesn't seem like it, but we do.
Yeah, it's tight.
I'm just gonna be completely open and honest with where I'm at, because I think it's all jumbled in my brain and I want you all to poke holes in it, because I'm sure there's plenty. Like, part of my reluctance to identify the next thing is I don't like any of the options for a variety of reasons. Like, we heard from a lot of Hinchin families and staff, and that is living very prominently in my brain right now. And so it doesn't feel good to close them and shove them into State Road. I feel like that disproportionately impacts low-income families. Then what else do we have? We have Northwoods. We close Northwoods, and then we're trying to convince the community to invest in a new school because we need to close 2 really old schools, but we also think we should close one of our newest ones. Like, that feels like a confusing message. And then what's our other option? Summit? A north side, none of them feel like good options, and that is my primary reluctance, and that doesn't make it right. It's still our job to decide what we want to do, but like, I just don't know what to do.
What I heard from our Spence and Emerson staff when I spoke to them after the last school board meeting was cautious optimism, in part, or in large part, because their staff and families generally get to travel together to this new space, and they get to keep some of that culture together and come together in a new building. Of course, there's trepidation with any change, and people are nervous about new spaces and new things, but the thing that I heard repeatedly from staff was keeping their staff and student family together as much as possible. And so I would just offer up that that is one of the advantages of the Hinchin plus State Road concept, in that it does keep two communities and bring them together. It's not a neutral site like the Emerson and Spence proposal. But that is one of the reasons why I've added that consistently throughout this, is because it does provide an opportunity to meet one of the things I've been hearing from our staff as we talk about this process.
And I guess I would just also add that I don't know that there's any good options. Right? We don't have that luxury of good options. We are in a situation where we have no choice. So I agree with Ms. Birkenall. There's not a lot of good options for the second lever, but I don't know that we have any opportunities here to find good options.
Where my head's at is, if the referendum fails, would your choice change on what your second lever would be? Because it's going to become your primary lever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, identifying it now or in the future, it really doesn't change. The question is which, but if it fails, it's both. You're going back to the FAC, you're starting from the FAC's recommendation again, probably, and saying, well, now I'm gonna have to make the choice of two, right? So, that's where my head's at, I guess, is if it changes, none of them are good, but if you've got a better option that changes, to me, it's the same question, it's just posed on when it's gonna be asked on the timeline.
Juan, you going?
Well, I was just going to say, in my opinion, the second lever would be part of the same question. We would not have two different questions. It'd be one referendum question with both pieces attached. Because then, if that gets voted down, we have no choice but to go to the FAC.
That was my point.
Is that a satisfying result? And, I mean, my support for the referendum question we decided upon was based upon the idea that I don't want to merely close schools without a creative path forward for what the vision of the district is. So in crafting a referendum question, I suppose that ties me to wanting to retain flexibility to not just have to close some set of schools or some school without a possibility in the near future of a replacement or a new build somewhere. That would feel unsatisfying to me and to, I think, a lot of people in our community. But at the same time, Juan, in response to that concern, I think I understand Jeff's concern for then that what if, and now I am thinking that, the referendum question, as we've posed the basic question, is very clear, and it is, I think it's a good sell as well. I mean, I voted for it, so I think there is merit to trying to figure that out, gauge the public sentiment towards that question with the knowledge that we're not done yet, right? We have to keep doing something. I have a procedural question then. If the referendum passes, and we haven't put a second part of the question on there, what that second lever is going to be, if that second lever is closing and moving students into a different, closing school A, right, and moving them into some other set of buildings, that doesn't require a referendum.
If it's simple closure, it doesn't require a referendum, and it could happen anytime.
Yeah. The only reason we have the referendum as part of this is because we'd be building a new building. So I also think like it's hard for me to know like what the next board will do. So it's hard for me to be like, well, the assumption would be to just do the FAC recommendation, because who knows who's gonna be on the board, right? And who knows how they will interpret the information that's been given to us, right? And so much of the data interpretation also is like flavored with personal values, like, you know, and so.
I don't know that it's your responsibility, or any of ours frankly, to think, if a referendum passes, well, that changes the facts on the ground for the next board to decide what's next. So the nature of the FAC recommendation changes with it, although the information about the impacts of the different options remains relevant. Right.
Yeah. So are you now stepping away from a complete ask?
Is that what you were saying?
No, I almost think that to be transparent with the community, if we can say as much as we want that we're gonna have to close something after this passes, will that message get to every voter? No. So would it make more sense to plot the path forward and say, we're gonna set to close these buildings and
That's what I thought
in
you were
this
saying.
timeline, so a delayed timeline, saying, okay, we're gonna close this building in 2 years from now, this building from 2 years from now, it allows us to plan our way through it prior to us posing the question on the referendum, because it shows we've already made the choice. And we have a plan in place. Because to me, it doesn't change.
Juan, are you safe?
I hope so.
It's a little crazy out here. I guess where I'm at as well is thinking about the referendum. We're talking about increasing somebody's taxes, right? We're talking, what I heard is like 29 cents is the mill rate. So is what we're talking about then, let's put this on the referendum now, and in a few years, we're going to be asking for more potentially, whether it be a remodel, whether it be an addition, and now we're gonna go to the community to ask for more money. And I guess I'm just struggling with having to go to taxpayers and say, yeah, we're gonna increase your taxes now, and oh, by the way, in a few years, we're gonna raise your taxes as well, but we just don't know how much, and we don't know where, and we don't know how. That just seems odd to me, and that's why I think doing one referendum with everything on there and saying, this is it, this is exactly how much it's going to cost us. If we need to make other closures, we will as necessary. We don't want to. However, this is the bill.
We will be going to the community in the future because we have aging buildings, period. That's just a fact. It does seem weird, I don't disagree, it like, if you pass this, it's like, that's done, but, I mean, the fact is we have aging buildings. Setting aside the whole financial crisis, we have aging buildings and they have to be replaced, and I think the public understands that's just the course of doing business. And so my picture in my head, again, you're not gonna be surprised, there might be a middle school referendum, and maybe on that one, we could add the second lever. At that point would make some sense. That's kind of where my head was going at. I do think putting out some options for that initial public engagement, Dr. Sprague, you got me thinking that makes some sense, but we have to be really clear. If this referendum doesn't pass, the first thing we're gonna do is X, Y, or Z, and we have to tell the community what that is. Not as a threat, but as we have to either do this, get this passed, or this will happen. And if we aren't real clear with that, then the public is unhappy with us. And
They
so,
were not happy with that message with the high school consolidation.
Well,
We're
But we
clear
didn't-
with it.
right, and
But we
here we
didn't do
are,
it.
right?
but I think, again, when we've done operating referendums in the past or other things, we've said, if we don't get this, then we will do this. And it's, again, it's not a threat. This is all the money we
It's
have.
stewardship is what.
This is what we have to do. These are our only choices. If you got a better one, public engagement give that to us. I don't know that it's out there, but again, I don't disagree either with Dr. Jimenez about the timeline and talking to the public about the referendum. Again, my picture for the initial public engagement is that when we do have the final question put together, when we go to the public to talk to them about why this is important, we can also add to that, this is the public input we received, and this is why we're coming to you with this. So it isn't just the 9 of us dreamt this up. And so that, I think that's, I want to, and I agree that there's, as I said early on, it's going to be a heavy lift to get that message out there. We need as much time as possible, but I think it's a balancing act, getting some public input now, formulating that question. I'm thinking June-ish, end of June-ish, doing public input, April, May, early June, because summer gets crazy and we're not going to see people. And then by late June, early July, we've got the question finalized, and we're going out there with what the ask is and providing that information to the public. That's the picture in my head.
One thing I'd heard from the board last meeting was you felt like you had lots of public input over the last 6 to 8 months, and that's why you felt comfortable making a decision about consolidating the 2 schools at one site. And so if that's the referendum direction, I guess I would just ask, what other information are you going to gather from the community specifically to address, what a referendum question looks like? That's what I'd be curious
Yeah.
about.
I would go back, Annie, to your question to me before. No, I think I am still in favor of a complete question for many of the reasons that Dr. Jimenez just kind of went to. That, again, we do have the information about our facilities, about the choices we have in front of us there. We are the ones who have invested the most in being able to make that decision. And we are also the ones who were elected to take a broader view and work in the community interest, whereas the individual voter has no such obligation to do anything but advance limited self-interest, right? Which is not to say that there are perfectly selfless people out in our community who are capable of taking the long view, or a broader view. That's not what I'm saying at all, but it is our duty to do that, and I think that we are the ones best positioned to make that decision and to go forward with the justification for why this is the plan that is in the districts and therefore the community's best interest, and to ask for the input on the basis of what do we want it to look like. So I do tend to agree with Dr. Jimenez on that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think with regard to messaging around the referendum question, to me, a complete referendum question would still be focused on the single goal, which is right-sizing our district. I think that's like a very easy to understand concept. This is the plan that board has put forth to right-size the district, consolidate elementary schools within the 2050 plan. There are no other plans to consolidate buildings. There is not a plan to consolidate the high schools, which people think is still on the table. I think that's an important message to get out there now, is that that's not on the table anymore. This is what we need to do to get the right amount of buildings for the size of our district within the next 26 years. And that doesn't mean that we couldn't go back to the community for another referendum. I think that's in the cards every couple of years anyway, just based on the inadequate amount of funding coming from the state. But then the next referendum, whether that's a year from November, whenever, that could focus more on, okay, we've done the work of consolidating our buildings. Now we're gonna work to improve the buildings that we have and make them appropriate for 2025 or 2026 or whatever.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Katie.
Thanks, Juan.
I agree as well. I think settling this question now frees us up to do the next question and the next question from a much stronger standpoint.
Meredith, do you have any thoughts? Lots of thoughts. Any that you want to share?
No, I mean, I think the thing that I'm hearing, that I think you're asking, is when we talk about a complete question, we know there's like a 3.4 million deficit, and the consolidation at Spence gets us 1.4 million or 1.6 toward it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about a complete question, do we need to decide about Hinchin and State or some other, when you're talking about that second lever, like, I can see.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what
And
I
if the
think.
answer is yes, and the message is we're right-sizing and we're consolidating the things now that we think will put us in position to later improve, I think that's probably the wise thing to do, only because by going to referendum and building a new building, we're already putting off for 3 years while that's getting built. We're stretching thin to keep everything in place while the new thing is built.
It is scary to think about having all of the things for consolidation on the referendum, because then
Well,
you're
and having
adding
4
people who are
schools,
against
right?
it.
It's now 4 schools we'd be, or however many, it's adding more than just the 2 schools we've been
Right.
talking about engaging.
Or you're adding people that are for it.
Also that, and there's already a yard, there's already yard signs about, like, be transparent, and people
I don't think that's about us.
Oh, it's not, what's
not
that
about us.
about?
No.
It's about heaters.
Ah, that's my guilty conscience
Isn't-
complex.
It might be about us just as easily.
Well, it's right
Could be
next to,
about
like,
everybody.
don't close my school sign.
Yeah,
Okay, well, never mind.
it's a different issue.
Many of those signs are now just transparent growth, not don't close Emerson signs. Those were taken down in a number of homes, so that's something to keep track of too.
And then I think, Annie, to your question, like, it does seem like we should put together what we think the referendum should have, and then go to the community and say, if this referendum goes forward, like, what do you, I do think we've gotten so much input from individual community members, from the FAC, from, like, the RFIs that you've given us. Like, what else could you tell me about schools that would, that, I
Would
don't know.
change.
I don't know what else you could tell me
Yeah, I feel
about
like the
where students
input-
live, about the socioeconomic balance.
Yeah, I feel like the greatest input we'd get is like, who advocates the loudest.
We'll get opinions.
And so,
people who
and
have
that
them.
isn't necessarily like the best information to make a decision on.
Yeah.
And so I just have concern, like, we have so much information. I have concerns about going for more to form a question and getting dangerously close to that referendum the 70 days before, and limiting the amount of time that we would have to engage the community in what it is. I favor simplicity, but if the majority prefers a complete, Brad, do you have thoughts on?
Yeah, I think we need to just form get an idea of what the question would be versus keeping it open, and we're gonna hear the same thing.
Yeah.
And we've heard
Yeah,
it for months.
I mean, part of me thinks if there was something that we weren't, if there was a plan in somebody's mind that we had not considered, that we would have heard it, somebody would have brought it forward, right? So I think that what we're looking for is to show that we have thought through the plan forward that gets us on a stable footing to allow us to think about what's next and what's possible and what we want to build, and to have such a fundamental question answered for our future just puts us on a sound footing to make those asks. And I agree with you. I think the middle schools are coming. I wonder how far in the future, but we're limited in how far down the road we're able to base our actions right now.
I mean, what I would hope to get out of public information from this point forward is answering the questions that they're having about the impact of what this is gonna be, the cost, what's gonna happen to the facilities possibly that are gonna be closing. Those are the kinds of things that, I mean, and then we could formulate questions in the end or answers to those kinds of questions, which would help the referendum question, you know, when it's put out, coming up with FAQs.
Okay, so in terms of scheduling board discussions, board agendas on this topic, we're not making any votes tonight. We did not signal to the community that any votes were happening, right? Like, and more discussion on what the full ask will be needs to occur. I can put this on the next agenda, and we can do that.
I would be in favor of that.
Does the board feel like it has all the information it needs to make that second lever poll part of the discussion?
So what are we doing on the 13th then?
That's a workshop for discussing how the board would engage the community. In my mind, because I thought that the last conversation that the board was like, we want this board to come up with the referendum language, right? So in my mind, that workshop was looking forward into the summer, and that was an opportunity for this board to talk about community engagement plans so that I could start helping to schedule that out into the summer. The three of us won't be part of those meetings unless we come as regular private citizens. But that workshop, in my mind, is just to
The communication.
talk about what the communication strategy would be.
That was my understanding from our last meeting.
And the communication strategy, once the referendum language is determined. That's how I interpreted the discussion to like lean, but I can be wrong. I also am rocking a really bad headache today, so being real simple in what you're saying to me is best.
I think what's missing here is our conversation about how do we put forward a referendum that will pass? Because if we're gonna load it up with all the possibilities, because we're the be-all, know-all, wise people, I think we're gonna end up with a similar result that happened a few years ago. And that's my biggest thing that's making my stomach hurt in this whole conversation. We have an opportunity to build a new school, a really state-of-the-art school, a really cool school, and I think we have the opportunity to have, we aren't gonna get all the way on all these levers, but are we gonna compromise getting a big step of the way, or are we, by not making that hugely successful? That's where I'm just really struggling. This is gonna be a big ask, period, and so, I'm not trying to be not transparent or anything like that, because there's something else that's gonna happen down the road, but until we know what the cost of the, until this passes and we start building the building and we see what happens in the school, I think there's so many things that are unknown at this time. That's where I'm just really struggling. Are we
So
trying
to
to solve the whole
translate-
problem, or are we trying to get a successful referendum?
Okay, so to translate kind of where you are, and in terms of like me trying to understand what our next steps are, you are more in favor of a referendum that only includes the Emerson Spence consolidation option, is that correct?
At this point, yes.
Okay, so simplicity,
Again,
just one,
I'm
not the full
taking
ask.
input, but at this point, I think we just need to, do we want to solve the whole problem when we haven't even looked at the future budgets yet? Or do we want to make a successful referendum? That's how I'm seeing it right now. And how do we make it successful? And again, that's why I keep bringing up the public input, because I think providing that opportunity helps make it successful.
So this might be one of the occasions where we agree, because I still favor, don't laugh, we get along.
I agree with simplicity too.
But I think,
There is
like,
something about piling everything on that.
Yeah, and I feel like the lessons that you shared about the North Side and how the North Side Elementary, there were a couple failed referendums because there was complicated pieces. And if I think about like me going to a neighbor and trying to answer questions about what the ask is, it has to be super simple. It has to be like, we're asking you if you will fund this project to build a school. It will close this school and this school. Do you support it or not? If we're also then saying, we want you to do that, and it will also do this thing that will add some things and close this school, it may get more confusing the more pieces you add. I can definitely understand the power of a full ask, but I also worry about just like the garbled, like, and it's not that it would be garbled, I think we would get a real slick
No,
message
I
out,
mean,
but
you're
just like,
introducing possibility, though.
yeah,
Sorry, David.
yeah.
I guess I would counter the idea that having both within one referendum is not simplistic. I think I heard somebody say that what we are doing is trying to right-size our district at the elementary level. To do that, we need to reduce our footprint. To do that, we are taking two schools and combining them into a brand-new school and combining two other schools by adding an addition to one of our current schools. I don't know that that's super complex, but I do think that it can be considered simple, like you said, Madam President, that, we can come up with the right message But the main argument is we are consolidating to right size at the elementary level. We've already done that at the middle school level by closing Lincoln. And we went with an idea for the high schools. It did not pass, and we are taking that off the table at this point in time. So this is the full ask for the elementary level right sizing.
So I'm hearing we should bring language that explores both options for the board to consider at our next meeting, so we can work with our legal counsel to provide a simple ask and the full ask. It doesn't seem like there's appetite at the board level for CTE or other things at this time. And so we can narrow in on those two options for the board to consider and debate further.
Have we as a board decided that the second option, the only second option is Hinch and State Road?
No, that's what I thought.
That's where I'm getting,
Yeah.
like, I'm like,
No, and I think that's just what I need to know in terms of like agenda planning. Like, does the board need to have time to discuss that second option if it will be important for determining referendum language?
Either way, we would only need 2 referendum language options, one for building a new school here, and then one for doing this and the Hinch and State Road, because if,
But there was other options.
I know, but they wouldn't require money.
They don't need to be
It
on a
wouldn't be part of the
referendum.
ask.
You're right.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know like how to structure the agenda. Like if the board was like, we're not gonna deal with the second option at all, then I would say, all right, I can put together referendum language. Dr. Engel can work on that, and then that comes before the board and the board votes. The referendum language is set. If the board wants to keep discussing what the second option would be, then that would just occur in the meetings before the referendum language is determined. And then the referendum language would be contingent on whatever that second option is, only if the second option includes state road additions. Does that make any sense?
I think we're too split at this point to give you a solid answer.
I know.
I'm split myself.
I know,
Like,
yeah,
every
isn't
time
it fun?
people talk, I'm just
Yeah.
going
Right.
back and forth.
So what we'll do, we'll just keep talking about this and we won't, I hate to put this until the last meeting, before the next board comes on, but I feel like, I guess, could the board come to a decision at the next meeting? Do we want to have it as an information item where we're just discussing this for a little while? Or do we want to have it as like a matter for board action and test to see where board members are? Because there isn't new information that we will receive. It's more just
let's decide.
personal decisions
I feel
on-
like we need to call the question. And that will allow us to focus our efforts and our time on communicating and reaching out and soliciting input.
So at our next meeting, the board will discuss potentially the referendum language. It will not be put together, but that second lever, if the board wants to pull it or.
I think you can put it as an action item, but there might not be action taken, but at least if that's an
Right.
option. I'm not quite sure we're all ready to do that, but if it's posted, that would be a good option.
Yes?
Juan, did you have a point?
I was just gonna agree with Ms. Supla. I think that we should put it on the action item.
Right.
And if we don't take action, great.
Right. I agree.
Cool.
Yeah, I just don't, like,
I'm not prepared to take action.
I have a-
That can be tabled.
yeah, and we don't need, and I mean, it's possible that someone moves forward with a motion and we end up getting a majority of the board and then we move forward. I mean, we don't all have to agree on the plan forward.
And if a vote fails or a vote passes, well, then we have a place to move forward from.
Yeah.
That's
just-
what I'm feeling I need right now, because we keep talking about the nature of the question itself at a very high, kind of abstract level, and we need to put direction towards things. I have a colorful phrase from my father about pots and when to get off of them.
Yeah, let's get off this pot. Jeez, sorry guys. I would love to, ideally, I would love to have the referendum language determined. If the board wants to do just one Emerson Spence thing, that's cool. If the majority of the board wants to pull that second lever, that's the will of the board, that's cool. I would really prefer if we're not doing that on April 15th. I think that's cutting it really close.
I think we need to think really hard about what we need in order to make the decision, because judging from the conversation tonight, there's a few people who feel strongly that we should make a decision and put it all on the referendum, and there's some that feel like we need to keep it simple and only have, and then there's a bunch of us monkeys in the middle swinging back and forth, and what do we need in order to move forward on this, because we have to move forward. At some point, we have to move forward, and I don't know,
So what more information are you looking for?
I don't know.
Okay, because it feels to me like we have what those second options would be, that we each individually have to decide what feels like the best course for us. And we haven't been able to talk specifically enough about which course gives us the most benefit or the best trade-offs, because we've been talking about whether to ask the question, right? And we each need to come to that decision and then to vote on whether or not the question with just the referendum or the question with both options is the way we want to go, so that we can refocus our attention on talking to the community. That's the way I feel. And I think in 2 weeks, I'll be ready to make that decision. And personally, I'm not going too terribly far back and forth about what I feel is the best direction forward, except insofar as the question of simplicity. I think that's a really meaningful one. And I am struggling a little bit with, is the complete plan too complicated, and just trying to frame out, how am I gonna go communicate about that? And I'm not decided on that yet, but I think in 2 weeks, I darn well ought to be.
I have a question. If this board were to, I'm just thinking there's a lot of time between now and August, like, stuff happens. Like, maybe nothing will happen, but maybe something unusual could come up or happen. If we set language, do we have any opportunity to change it before August, or once we vote on that, we are legally obligated to stick with that no matter what public input, no matter what happens in the world, we're stuck with that?
I can get you an opinion on that.
Okay.
That's what I've been wondering, is like, I feel like if we pose the question, now to talk about it and get input, we can revise the question based on that input until August, whatever it is. But if that's not the case, that does
Because I think once you
change
vote
the
on
calculus.
referendum language, I know there's laws around that, so I know it's it's not just like.
Right, we can't just keep changing it.
Yeah, Robert's rules, you can't just change like we do a motion, so.
Right.
It involves state elections, so there's broader statewide concerns about elections. So that shouldn't be hard to get from our legal counsel, and quick answer.
I feel like that would be important enough to be able to make a decision in 2 weeks too, if we can get that answer on how it impacts the process, what we have to decide now. That's crucial.
I just want to make sure we put the right question out there rather than to rush it. That's where I'm struggling. And so then you'll say, what more information do you need? And like Katie, I don't know, but I'm not sure what it is. Ms. Bergedahl, I'm sorry, I'm using improper
I've been
language
very
on the
familiar
table.
today, I apologize, everyone.
It's okay, we can drop the formalities.
Okay.
I'm cool with it.
It is. So I think this is where, that's why I asked the question about the workshop, is I thought we left the last meeting pretty clear that we agreed we were gonna bring a question forward about consolidating 2 schools onto the Hogan site.
Yes.
And now this meeting, we're talking about the pulling the second lever, which we've been, the messaging to the community, they're gonna feel like that has been backburnered and that they're safe for this point, because that's the message I'm hearing from the community is we're focusing, I thought the board agreed we were pretty focused on the question of the consolidation, not the consolidation and the next couple of levers, right? We know that we've talked about it, we know that that's gonna have to happen with the people I've talked to, I'm communicating that to. But I just wanna caution us that when we're trying to communicate something that's pretty complex, that we do what we've said, which is we've talked about this consolidation, push that forward. At the same time, we're not saying you can't be doing other work, but I thought at least the direction I felt that we had was this board was going to, we agreed upon the consolidation. This is where he talks every time.
Yeah, and I guess, Mr.
And
Jackson, I had a different opinion about that. My understanding was we settled on one plan that is definitely moving forward to referendum, and we were still in the conversation mode of what else might be added or not added. So it's still left it open. So I didn't leave that meeting feeling like we were just going to move forward with a basic consolidation at the Hogan site. I left that meeting feeling as though that is definitely on the referendum question. We still haven't decided what else, but we will have something done by the time the new board is seated. That was what I walked away with.
Okay, and if I could finish, then I would say yes, wanted to make sure that we were going to, as this board, take care of that question, and we wanted the input from the new board on lever 2 and lever 3. That's the way I walked away from where we stood. So I'm okay either way, but again, I'm more from a public perception of our process. I just want to make sure that we're all the same, because that's where I landed, was we were cool on this. New board was going to handle lever 2 and 3, if there was lever 2 and 3, which we know there will be.
That was not the impression I left with.
Okay, well, maybe I misread everything then.
I got like some mixed signals. There were some comments about like interest in still discussing what that second option would be. If, for example, if the second option had to include additional referendum ask, then that was still like maybe part of the discussion. But there was also comments about like, nope, we gotta keep it simple. We gotta just do one, put the effort into the one thing. So,
Maybe that's the message I heard.
yeah, I think it depends on like volume of voices.
Yeah, probably.
But
And you were pretty clear with your goal for that meeting, is that you wanted us to,
first
at a
step,
minimum, pick
I
the
just needed
first
the
step.
first step,
Yeah.
yeah. Which I think,
Which we did.
yeah, and the reason why I brought this back to the meeting was because I need to know, is the conversation done or not? And if it's not, what timeline do we need to do this on? So,
The biggest question mark is if a majority of us agree on the next step would be Hinchin State Road, then would it be the best strategy to combine that with the Emmer Spence question on the referendum in November? Or do we think it would be a better strategy to keep that one simple and then go to referendum again, maybe in April for?
Well, we don't have to decide if we go to referendum, right? I mean, that will come.
Well, if a majority of us decided that the next step would be Hinchin State Road, then we need to decide strategically when would be the best time to ask the community about that. Would it be bundling it in November or not?
No, I apologize if I'm misunderstanding where we were a minute ago. I thought where I was a minute ago was at our next meeting wanting to vote on if the question will be just the referendum we've already agreed to, or if it will be the referendum plus,
yeah.
right? And that we needed to decide that. And then the question about, your question now about how to phrase it, am I understanding you right? When to phrase the question?
Yeah,
I thought
because
November.
the referendum plus, if we're talking only about elementary consolidation, referendum plus means Hinchin State Road, Emerson, Hogan. Because
There
we
were other
don't need,
options, though.
yeah, but they don't require money from the public, so they
You're
don't
right.
need to be part of
Yeah.
the referendum
So
question.
that doesn't need to be part, so we need to decide on Hinchin.
Yes, we need to decide if that is part of the plan or not, and then we need to decide if it is, when do we ask the question?
Yeah, you could close any of the other schools that the board has talked about, including Hinchin, without a referendum. The thing that the board talked about as an asset to the Emerson and Spence consolidation was that it was giving some folks something to look forward to and bringing staff together. That would be a potential advantage of the Hinchin and State Road consolidation, although it does not have a neutral site. And so that would be an option for a referendum now or in the future, as Ms. Bergdahl outlined. But any other discussion about a second closure would not need to involve a referendum.
Okay. I apologize for getting mixed up. on
No,
that, so-
it's very, very complex.
Easy to get mixed up
But that's,
on this
but
stuff.
that is then the decision that I feel we need to make
Mhm.
next meeting. That's what I've been getting at. I thought that was the discussion tonight, not an action item, but we were gonna try to suss out which of the remaining options we felt was the best.
Mhm.
And I'm open to persuasion that the simplicity of the referendum question alone is the best course of action, but we've been talking about, again, the nature of the ask
Mhm.
at a different level than that.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so we'll talk about this again at the next meeting, and in the meantime, I guess like, it would be interesting as you talk to community members about what we've already agreed to do, the Emerson Spence at the Hogan site as the referendum. Try to suss out how clear the message is that they've already received, and if there's, because in the conversations I've already had in the community about what we've just agreed to on that one little referendum piece, there's confusion about like, are we gonna get to pick which ones? You're gonna have us pick now? There's a lot of weird like FAC and referent like weirdness, which is why I favor the simpler option of like, this is the thing we know, we can give it all of our effort and care, make sure it's the
Yeah.
best possible thing that we can offer these neighborhoods and these families, and then
And focus on engaging this community.
yes, and then the next step, I feel like 4 huge neighborhoods is a lot of mileage to cover, a lot of different households to really engage with, to really like explain why this is good and not a loss.
I would just offer up the caveat that everybody in the district gets to vote, and so we have
Right.
to explain to somebody
That's
on
true.
the island why they need to vote for Emerson and Spence to get a new elementary school and Southern Bluffs and State Road.
That's true.
And so everybody needs to be engaged. How many communities it directly impacts certainly makes a difference in terms of the likelihood of success, but it will be a district-wide effort.
But, so for next time, will we have an action item on that question?
I think we can, and then see where the votes
We have
fall.
to try.
And
right,
then if
something.
it fails, then, boy, what would we do? We would bring the next,
Yeah.
I guess if the referendum and some option failed, then we would just bring up the simple referendum and see what happens.
Could I ask that we get some additional information on this State Road option? State Road has 282 students in it, and currently, oh, I'm reading the wrong numbers. Can you tell us about the capacity of it, and then the current enrollment, and how, I guess I want more information.
That's
Why is
all
it
in our
8?
reports, though.
Is it?
I can pull that out as we meet next time, just so it's all in one spot for folks to
I thought
kind
I
of focus
didn't
on.
see that. If I missed it, I
It's
apologize.
been weeks since we looked at
Yeah,
it.
the big fold-out.
Can we look at boundarying too, because that's a weird, Hinchin's got a weird boundary, right? Some of that could go to Southern Bluffs, some of it could go to Hamilton, some of it could go to, if you look at closest to school, it's that weird shaped one that I would, if we could give us a proposed, because again, as far as we're looking at equitability and everything that we see, where those students could land, it might help us, at least me, just make sure I've
But
reviewed
isn't
it.
didn't we get that last time with those options?
We didn't get a-
What
we
are you
didn't get a-
looking for beyond
So-
what was there?
so-
There was a more of a whole consolidation as opposed to a divide and
Correct.
move students closer to their,
More of a one for one,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
so.
Yeah. The one we
can-
did was the one we voted on, which was Emerson Spence. There was a
Right,
reboundary
so
and
the
it made
boundaries
sense.
were specific to that, I got you.
Correct.
Yep,
So
we can
similar to
provide that.
And then I guess for another ask for me is, I'd like to at least know a little bit more about what we're gonna do with the administration, where we're gonna put them. I think that's what helped the community understand, okay, are they gonna be on the site, are they not gonna be on the site? Like, what are we gonna do with them? What's it gonna look like? So I'd like to have a little bit more information about that as well.
And what it might cost to demolish this and move people around.
Well, we got the demo costs, they were
Yeah,
part of
that's-
this,
and
but
one's-
it's,
that's in
Yeah,
the-
this one too.
that was part of
for
the
today. Yeah.
elementary school ad.
Just for your awareness, we've talked, and our initial recommendation would be to move administration to Central and
Okay.
remodel that space. We can come up with an estimated cost of that remodel, but that would be our recommendation. There's a few other options which we can provide as well, though.
No, it's fine, but I just think that'll help us shape that narrative to the community of, here's all the cascading effects that we're gonna see,
Absolutely.
so.
Will do.
Does the workshop March 13th still interests the board.
I
Yes,
think we need to
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
our plan. for
People want to do
communicating.
that?
yes.
Okay. Okay. All right, let's move on in the meeting. I think we've got asks. If there's more information that board members need, please reach out to Dr. Engel. And in the meantime, think about where you fall. Okay, so we did the achievement gap reduction report. Now we can do the 24-25 budget development timeline.
Yeah, this item is a part of the development of our budget book, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Spring.
Sure, this is the first entry in our budget book that we bring to the board every year. Provides that timeline, so as you can see, it's a year-long process as we prepare for the next budget year. And this is when you can expect to see the items that end up in the budget book in September, when you get your first glance at the whole book together. Any questions?
I'm looking ahead at our next report, and it's one of the things that we talked about, I think, in June. There are, throughout the year, budget adjustments that have to happen, because a budget is a plan, it's the best plan you got, and then things change. Could we build in budget adjustments maybe a couple times a year instead of just the end of the year? I think, and that allows us, I think, to be a little more transparent with the public, but I think a budget includes budget adjustments that happen after the fact as well, because that's just the nature of how business works.
Are we constrained by when our funding comes in that, Patty?
We are, because most of them occur because of adjustments in grants. The reason that we have budget amendments is because of the purpose. The board approves the purpose of the funding or the expenses, right? And that purpose may change, but it doesn't change the total budget overall. So that is the reasoning that we compile it all at the end of the year, when we can actually give you a real good picture of how it's affecting the budget at the end of the year.
And those purposes are somewhat broad, and so,
It's usually between instructional, your 100,000 function, or support, the 200,000.
so we often don't know, like, we wouldn't exceed the budget for any of those broad categories likely until fourth quarter, once we reconcile all the bills. And so,
I think the budget update that we receive, is it
Quarterly.
quarterly? I feel like, I mean, that shows us where we're at year-to-date with budget and allows Ms. Spring to provide any commentary related to variances or expected variances or anomalies or whatever. For me, at least, that is,
I'm just thinking about in June, there's, the end of June, we did a budget adjustment for the whole year, but it was all done, like our approving it was kind of like, we didn't provide any value to it.
because it wasn't a change in the amount. It was a change in how
Right.
it was.
The board gives us the authority
some
to
amounts
manage
change.
the budget during the year. If it was very impactful, like we had to go into fund balance because, we had this major cost, that would absolutely be brought to you during the year. But if you did really look very, very carefully at the monthly budget, those budget adjustments are reflected in that budget. That budget by line or purpose could change from month to month based on any budget adjustments that were done. So that report that I run to generate that report reflects any budget adjustments during that month. It doesn't give you the detail, but it may change.
But those are
from a
budget
line.
adjustments that haven't been approved by this body. And there are times, I guess which category it goes in, I'm not really too worried about. But the amounts do change, like we get grants we didn't know we were gonna get when we did the budget, and then we get donations we didn't know. Things state comes up with a new idea in January that we get to spend by the end of June. I mean, that's just the nature of how business goes, and so those kind of adjustments, I was just thinking, for us to be able to approve them, the amounts, the category it's in, I don't, that's not for us, that's trivia for us to decide. I'm just thinking the amounts, because then otherwise, what are we approving the end of June when we do that adjustment? That's.
Those are the state required adjustments because the transfer of funds occurs between purposes, you know, from the 100,000s to the 200,000s, et cetera. And so those are required by state law, or at least our interpretation of state law, to be approved by the school board at that level. In every district I've been in, and including the history I've seen from this board using policy and coherent governance, you know, this is standard practice, and that the board dictates its values through policy. It says, execute the plan. There's the budget book and an opportunity to review all of that. In October is the board certifies the levy, and then we make the necessary adjustments because the board has told us to run the school district, and then we come back in June or July and indicate like, hey, here's where we ran over on the 100,000s, here we ran over in the 200,000s, we're shifting a little bit of money. It's usually not to any great extent. You know, the board requires us to bid things at certain levels, you know, and other things were major purchases, anything that's capital, like you saw the bids for the bathrooms come in there. You know, the board already has a lot of controls outlined in OE6 about where you want, you know, oversight around the budget, and the board can certainly consider more of those opportunities in there. But up till this point, you know, this is commensurate with every other school district I've been in as far as the process goes. Certain open to exploring other ways of doing business.
Are we still on this budget development timeline?
Yep. Any other questions related to the timeline here? Right. Thank you, Ms. Spring. We'll move into operational expectation monitoring report, OE6, financial administration. Which I think is Ms. Spring again.
We usually do this report in January when it's very fresh in your mind, right after the auditor comes to speak to you, but because of the changes this year, we had to postpone it till today. So feel free to ask me any questions as we go through this, since it probably isn't as fresh as it might have been.
I would
in
offer
January.
up that in some years, given the dry nature of this particular OE, we've sometimes asked the board if there's any questions and started there, or we can read through it all and kind of talk about each monitoring element as we often do. We try and reserve that more for the more interesting OEs. And so I just throw it out there up front for the board's preference in terms of how to approach relating the information in this OE.
I am comfortable with the question method only because I'm aware of the time, the workshop, and 2 closed sessions, and one of those closed sessions will take a while. But if other board members need more time to look at this, to feel confident in the vote, we can go through it that way too.
And this is just information. The vote won't happen until next meeting, and so there's still time to ask those
Open it up at
follow-ups
that
and
time.
open it up at that time. So I did, given the timeline and everything else, I just throw that out there up front.
I didn't realize the time, so yeah, I might.
You're having
Whatever
such a
you
good
wanna
time,
do.
aren't you? Okay, do other board members need to go through item by item? Are there any questions that board members want to pose?
Is there anything that you think requires a little bit more context or detail than what's provided here?
The one thing I would point out is the exception, and that was, let's see, it was an OE 6.13, and indicator 1. This was under 6.13 is the superintendent may not allow any required reports to be overdue or inaccurately filed. And we did have an exception to that. We had the transportation report that was due June 30th, was not submitted until July 5th after a email we received from DPI notifying us that that report was late. And the person responsible for that report was actually very much tied up in the fire that we had at Central High School. The report was completed, he just did not submit it on time.
No excuse, just have to support things on time. That was the context that we identified as we investigated it.
And so it was immediately submitted once that was brought to our attention by DPI. There is no penalty for that report in particular. On some of our reports, there could be a penalty or some kind of delay in aid, maybe based on that report. So the transportation report, what's a concern by DPI is they have to take in 400 districts' reports on transportation for the previous year before they can determine the amount of transportation aid they will distribute in the next year to school districts statewide. So one report delayed or more delays the work of DPI. So that's the result of that report. That's the one I would bring to your attention.
Okay.
That's an exception.
Are there other questions on this one? Trevor, we were just opening it up to questions rather than going item by
Right.
item.
I did not have any when I read it before,
Okay.
sorry.
Just as, for next time when we vote, I will open discussion for additional questions to come up as you look over this and if there's things that come up that you have questions about or want to review. All right. Thank you, Ms. Spring. We'll move on to Operational Expectation Monitoring Report, OE3, Treatment of Community Stakeholders. Dr. Engel.
I'll read a little bit of the executive summary and highlight one or two items and then open it up to any questions. So the OE3 monitoring report demonstrates that community stakeholders are treated as the board expects across the OE3 operational expectations. This report highlights our school district's successful efforts to protect confidential information, the district's commitment to ensuring factual information is accessible to the public, and the district's successful resolution of formal complaints. The evidence contained in this report also highlights the consistent, varied manner in which the school district engages with stakeholders to ensure those that have an interest in the school district are included. The first set of indicators regarding confidential information, there's compliance letters for those that indicate we do not have breaches, complaints, etc. OE 3.2 talks about our complaint policy and where things are accessible. And as opposed to previous years, we did identify a number of complaints to report to the school board. 4 of the 5 of those, no appeal was made once they were addressed. One is at the school board level, and we'll talk about later today. And so that's an indication that our complaint policy is working and directing people through the levels so that their complaints are elevated, but also that they're being addressed satisfactorily for the individuals involved. OE 3.3 has, if you look at the links, it talks about the ways in which I and district staff engage with stakeholders in our community in a variety of ways. And so I feel that's relatively extensive for a school district our size, given the opportunities that we have there. And then 3.4 talks about how we engage with our own staff and how we engage through joint leadership and other means to involve our staff in decisions in the school district. And that is all that I would highlight, and happy to take any questions.
Questions from the board? Not hearing any.
Can I, sorry.
Yep, go for it.
On OE 3.3, Community Connections and Advisory Groups, how do we advertise and or recruit actively for membership on those groups, those various committees?
Some are preset and we're invited to those groups. In other cases, we're looking for diverse representation and actively recruiting kind of across the spectrum. It depends on the nature of each group. Sometimes there's specific organizations that we're looking for representation from. Sometimes it's identity groups where we're seeking participation to provide us the feedback that we need. So it kind of depends on the group and the intent. Yeah.
Other comments or questions from the board? Again, at our next meeting, after the motion and the second are made, we'll pause for discussion if anything comes up that board members would like to discuss further. Trevor's got his finger up.
I'm sorry, and maybe you mentioned something about this before, but in OE 3. No, never mind, sorry.
Okay. All right. Not hearing a lot of discussion. It's very hot in here. Okay. All right, so thank you, Dr. Ango. We'll move on to announcements. So just a reminder, we'll vote on those at the next meeting. And I'll turn it over to Mason. Do you have any announcements to share tonight?
Yes, I do. So these next few weeks will be a bit short but sweet. Not too much stuff going on, but winter sports have officially come to a close. I know boys track and girls track, as well as girls soccer, have already started their spring seasons, and the other sports will begin in these next few weeks. As well, the NHS and Red Cross blood drive that we had a few weeks ago went pretty well. We didn't have as many volunteers as we did last year, but regardless, we still had a lot of student, teacher, and community involvement, so it was really great. As well, NHS is hosting the Spring Craft Fair, which is very, very big for us. On March 16th, all the proceeds from the craft fair are given back to Logan students through scholarships. So very impactful.
Yeah.
And finally, the Logan Jazz Band are performing at Logan on March 12th. So get your tickets. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lily, do you have any updates to share today?
I don't have much. I was just going to talk about, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, Central Interact held a can collection that we competed with Anna at one of the boys' basketball games. And we ended up being able to collect about 1,000 cans, I think is what they ended up saying that we had. So that was really successful for us. This past Friday, too, the Future Center held a career fair in one of our gyms, and it just gave students a chance to just kind of walk around to different booths and learn about different jobs within the trades, and I believe like different military people were there as well. So I believe that was pretty successful for some of the underclassmen who are just kind of starting to explore their future careers. We also, this upcoming Wednesday, the Lacrosse League of Women voters is coming to visit during our resource or homeroom time, and they will help to get seniors registered to vote. So anyone who is 18 is able to bring their IDs, and everyone will be able to get signed up to vote. So yeah, those are kind of my updates.
Public Education Foundation's grants will be awarded next week, and pretty sure it's the largest amount ever awarded in a single round. So there will be news coverage on that, so stay tuned.
Great. Thank you. The only update I have is about the workshop. It'll be on March 13th at 6 p.m. We'll meet here. And because we've had all of our workshops streamed, we'll do the same thing in this space, so we won't meet upstairs. That's it. Dr. Engel?
March 3rd through 9th is School Social Work Week, and I'm incredibly thankful for our school social workers who connect students and families to resources, who help out in schools on a daily basis, providing emotional, behavioral support, social emotional learning, instruction, and coordinate with our county services. And so kudos to them.
Thank you. We'll move on now to agenda planning for our next meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the March 18th, 2024 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh.
Sorry.
Is there a question?
So you go ahead and second. That will include then the addition of
Yep.
question, okay.
Yep. So we'll do a roll call vote on this one.
Ms. Bergdahl?
Aye.
Dr. Garcia?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Dr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Dr. Sprague?
Aye.
Ms. Sukla?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye. And in the interest of time, let's skip the board debriefing. And, sorry, do you have stuff you want to share tonight? It is your night to share.
I will just say very, very quickly that I thought that I was energized by the discussion personally, and I felt that this was one of the first times in a while where we've been talking to each other and in response to things that people are bringing to the board, rather than talking about topics kind of in our silos. And I really value that exchange, because I think we see in how people are kind of going back and forth about what's best. That's the work, and that's really important. And I think in terms of what we can do better, the fact that individuals are leaving meetings with different impressions of the landing point is something we can continue to work on.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. All right, so we were gonna meet for workshops. I'm thinking if it's cool, we could do our closed sessions first. Is that okay? That way, staff that are here for closed session discussions don't have to stay even later, so if that's agreeable to everybody. So then, I have to read the little statement, which I think, is it attached to the workshop?
You have a printout.
I have a printout.
Or you should have a printout.
Ooh, I've got a lot of stuff here. Oh, here it is, okay. So the La Crosse Board of Education will consider a motion to move into closed session on Monday, March 4th, 2024, immediately following the Board of Education regular meeting. Hogan Administrative Center, room 209, pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. To wit, consider approval of the authorization for the potential future purchase of property for the ACE Construction Academy, and pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851F, considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where paragraph B applies, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data, or involved in such problems or investigations. To wit, discuss and appeal in accordance with Administrative Policy 8700. I'm considering a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
Do we have to vote on that, a roll call?
Yes.
Okay.
The second you, Dr. Sprague?
Yep.
Thank you.
Ms. Bergdahl?
Aye.
Dr. Garcia?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Dr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Dr. Sprague?
Aye.
Ms. Sukla?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye. All right, so we'll head upstairs. We can do a 5-minute break, and then we'll.
So Lily, we're heading upstairs for closed session, so you can pop off. And then if you wanted to rejoin for the workshop, you certainly could.